bbc.com/news. Now, I want to update you on the war in Yemen because the focus there at the moment is very much the port city of Hodeidah. You can see it on the west coast of Yemen here on the map. Government forces are trying again to take it back from Houthi rebels, and the consequences are serious. We're being told at least 149 people have been killed in 24 hours. And the reason both sides want this port is that it is of huge value to both of them and to civilians as well. The reason for that is it's the only route into Yemen for around 80% of the aid supplies that come into the country. Bear in mind, in Yemen, about 14 million people are at risk of starvation. The stakes are unimaginably high. As the UN Secretary-General emphasised today, if this port can't function, it will be an absolutely catastrophic situation. He also added that there's a consensus between the US, Russia, Europe and many other states in the region that it is finally time to end this conflict. But of course, that is far, far easier said than done. I've been talking to Nada Rashwan from BBC Monitoring. Here she is, first of all, on the situation inside Hodeidah.
On 2 November, pro-government forces in Hodeidah, who are backed by a Saudi-led Arab military coalition, they started a fresh offensive on the port city of Hodeidah. Many international organizations have been warning that the humanitarian situation there cannot afford to get worse. Children are facing risk of death in hospitals. Some civilians are trapped in areas of fighting where they can't flee.
When you're trying to find information from Hodeidah, how can you be sure of what you're finding? Because it's almost impossible for journalists to get there.
It is almost impossible for journalists to get there, and it's also impossible to find a source that you can rely on, because the media outlets that report on the Yemeni conflict can be extremely polarized. So you will need to check once and twice and try to get the information from as many sources as you can.
And we heard from the UN today saying the situation in Hodeidah could become catastrophic and that there's a shared purpose to end this conflict. But reading it, I couldn't feel any major shift there. What impact do you think those words could have?
This isn't really the first time that the UN has warned of a catastrophic situation. There was an offensive, the first offensive by the coalition to retake Hodeidah was in June, and it's been pretty much the same message that any damage to the port of Hodeidah would cause an unprecedented catastrophe in the country that's already been completely decimated by the war. So it's hard to imagine the kind of impact that this statement, that recent statements by the UN chief would make. However, Saudi Arabia has recently been facing unprecedented scrutiny from its usual traditional allies following the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And immediately after this pressure was increased, we heard calls from the US and the UK and France to end the war, and the US went as far as to call on the parties to the conflict to commit to a ceasefire in 30 days.
Well, so thank you very much to Rana from BBC